Welcome to this explainer on how 2000s indie culture shifted, going from its gritty New York City roots to, honestly, a completely bizarre digital afterlife. If you've opened any social media app lately, you've probably noticed this super chaotic, retro look popping up everywhere. Well, today we're going to unpack exactly where it came from and how it's totally mutated over the last 20 years. So here's the big question. Why, over 2 decades later, are teenagers on TikTok suddenly obsessed with this time-warped, sweaty flash photography aesthetic they're calling indie sleaze? To really get this massive trend, we can't just scroll through today's feeds. We have to figure out how a movement that literally started as an underground, anti-mainstream ideology was somehow resurrected as a highly commodified fashion statement. To answer that, we gotta look back at the actual humans who started it. When you look at reviews of Lizzie Goodman's oral history, Meet Me in the Bathroom, you get two wildly different views of these early 2000s artists. Some people see bands like The Strokes or Ya Ya Ya's as absolute rock trailblazers who practically saved music, but others viewed them as insufferable, privileged kids, like they were totally secure in their entitlement to just descend from the suburbs and treat New York City as their own personal playground. So yeah, it was a super polarizing scene right out of the gate. To understand how this all happened, we're going to trace this evolution across four key eras. We start with the 2001 post-9/11 NYC rock rebirth, then move into the 2000s rise of the blogosphere and pitchfork. Then we hit a hard stop in 2012 when Instagram gets bought and the original subculture essentially dies. And finally, we'll unpack 2021 when the Indie Sleaze Instagram account was coined, sparking this whole digital revival. Section 1. Post-9/11 NYC rock rebirth, myth versus reality. Right after the tragedy of 9/11, the US was obviously in deep uncertainty, but this time also coincided with the rebirth of a highly distinct New York rock scene. Now, while history heavily favors the rock saviors, bands like The Strokes, Interpol, LCD Sound System, as the absolute center of the universe, we have to remember the reality was way broader. There was actually this parallel borderline cabaret scene of alternative comedy and music flourishing in the exact same 10-square-mile radius. You had artists like Rufus Wainwright and comedy groups like the Upright Citizens Brigade cross-pollinating in these downtown clubs. The myth is that it was just four guys in leather jackets with guitars, but actually, scratch that, the reality was this deeply interconnected, diverse artistic ecosystem. But why did the indie rock side of things just explode globally? Well, looking at deep dive discussions from the Let's Talk Music community, it was basically a perfect storm. The internet, specifically Napster, made music wildly accessible for free. The blogosphere whipped up this intense, decentralized hype. Mainstream media literally started licensing these exact sounds from massive TV shows like The OC. Add in the collapse of complex foreign distribution territories and ridiculously cheap small venue touring, and boom, you have the blueprint for a total industry takeover. To put that takeover into perspective, by 2011, independent labels captured 31.2% of all album sales. That number is absolutely staggering. Why? Because it happened right as overall music industry revenues were literally being slashed in half. So while the major labels were scrambling just to survive, indie rock capitalized on the slump and turned a niche downtown scene into an absolute financial powerhouse. Section 2. The blogosphere hype machine. This sudden financial and cultural success fundamentally altered how fans interacted with the music. As academic research points out, indie fans completely abandoned the local record store for the internet. This birthed the hype cycle. It became this fast-paced era of large-scale groupthink, where maintaining your cool factor meant perpetually hunting down the newest, most obscure sounds before they hit the mainstream. Fans were consuming new bands rapidly just to maintain their cultural capital, heavily influenced by online reviews from sites like Pitchfork. You didn't just need to know bands anymore, you needed to know the right bands, and you needed to know them first. Yet even at this mid-2000s peak, the scene was still firmly tied to reality. Fans used profile-based platforms, think MySpace, to follow actual bands, to find actual, physical, sweaty dance floors, and to deliberately reject mainstream consumerism. It was a real, physical community using the internet as a tool, not as a replacement for reality. Section 3, the indie sleaze revival and hyperreality. However, that physical reality just didn't last. Academic research actually notes that the original subculture essentially died in 2012. Coincidentally, that's the exact same year Facebook bought Instagram, permanently shifting the internet over to feed-based platforms. The very moment social media shifted from profile-based pages like MySpace to these endless, algorithm-driven aesthetic feeds, it completely rewired how we consume and construct our own identities. Fast forward to 2021, and the shift is just undeniable. An Instagram account coined the retrospective term indie sleaze, and suddenly TikTok was flooded with videos proclaiming things like Tumblr indie sleaze is coming back. But notice how this revival is heavily focused on consumer products, things like iced coffee, specific jewelry, or makeup. It's completely detached from the original music or the actual physical community that started it all. A thesis out of Claremont applies a fascinating concept to explain this perfectly: Jean Baudrillard's theory of simulacra. It's this postmodern concept where images and simulations actually precede reality, and the copy becomes more real than the original truth. The TikTok version of indie sleaze is basically a hyper-real myth. Digital images, curated outfits, and flash photography have entirely replaced the actual history in the music of the 2000s. People are essentially copying a past they've only ever experienced through compressed online images. Wild, right? So, the contrast here perfectly captures what happened. The original 2000 scene, that was an anti-mainstream movement based around physical community and chaotic local music scenes. In stark contrast, today's feed-based revival is what academics call aesthetic capitalism. It's all about buying products to perform an individualized, time-warped identity for your followers. It's entirely trend-driven consumption, just masquerading as a subculture.
To sum up this incredible cultural mutation, one academic paper notes, identification is contingent upon consumption rather than cultural taste or practice. So today, belonging to this subculture no longer requires you to actually listen to the bands or go to the shows. You literally just have to buy the right aesthetic products for your social media feed. The line between dominant mass culture and counterculture has effectively vanished online.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to consider the next time you scroll through your feed. Are the digital subcultures we align with today actually real, or are they just an aesthetic we purchased to simulate a past we never lived? Take a moment to think about the trends you follow. Are they rooted in a genuine community, or is it just consumption? Thanks for checking out this explainer. I hope it completely changes how you look at the next big online wave.